actually have a fairly simple way of dealing with these situations. It is actually one word to deal with all those situations. And that is good. And this is actually something that one of my guys that worked for me pointed out to me. He would call me up or pull me aside with some major problem, some issue that was going on. And he'd say, boss, we got this and that and the other thing. And I'd look at him and I'd say, good. One day he was telling me about some issue that he was having. He said, I already know what you're going to say. And I said, well, what am I going to say? He said, you're going to say good. 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 You're going to say good. You're going to say good. You're going to say good. Good. So that's what you always say. When something is wrong and going bad, you always just look at me and say, good. Good. And I said, well, yeah. And I mean it. And that is how I feel. When things are going bad, there's going to be some good that's going to come from it. Oh, mission got canceled? Good. We can focus on another one. Didn't get the new high-speed gear we wanted? Good. We can keep it simple. Didn't get promoted? Good. More time to get better. Didn't get funded? Good. We own more of the company. Didn't get the job you wanted? Good. You can get more experience, build a better resume. You're going to say good. 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 You're going to say good. You're going to say good. You're going to say good. Good. Got injured. Got injured. Sprained my ankle. Good. 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 Needed a break from training. Got tapped out. Good. 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 It's better to tap in training than to tap out on the street. Got beat. Good. Good. We learned. Unexpected problems. Good. Good. We have the opportunity to figure out a solution. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. When things are going bad, don't get all bummed out. Don't get startled. Don't get frustrated. No. You just look at the issue and you say, good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. 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 You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. Good. I don't mean to say something that's all cliche. I don't mean to sound like Mr. Positive. Find the positive. But do that. Focus on the good. Focus on the good. Take that issue, take that problem. Take that issue, take that problem, and make it something good. Make it something good. And bring that attitude to your team. Do. You go forward. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. 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 You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. Good. And lastly, like to close this out, if you can say the word good guess what? It means you're still alive. It means you're still breathing. And if you're still breathing, well now, you still got some fight left in you. So get up, dust off, reload, recalibrate, re-engage, go out on the attack. And that right there is about as good as it gets.
Okay, so this is my daily routine of meditation, yoga, martial arts, and I'm going to be reading. I read and then meditate, yoga, martial arts after the reading. And I've recently added going on a daily run to that for a few reasons. A few reasons right here. So, excuse me. I invite you to practice along with me. For the reading today, I'll be reading from the Communist newspaper, the Voice of the Revolutionary Communists of America, and this is the October issue of this year. And the main article here is that the billionaires are the enemy. So I'll jump right in. Class struggle, not culture war. The assassination of Charlie Kirk has again polarized the country along culture war lines. In the aftermath of Kirk's public murder, the White House has vowed, quote, retribution against the radical left. And fears of political violence and talk of civil war have spiked. On an episode of the Charlie Kirk podcast, hosted, bizarrely, by Vice President J.D. Vance, Trump's top political advisor, Stephen Miller, alleged that a, quote, vast domestic terror movement, end quote, is running rampant. Quote, with God as my witness, we are going to use every resource we have at the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and throughout this government to identify, disrupt, dismantle, and destroy these networks. Behind these threats is a clear attempt by the Trump administration to make full use of Kirk's martyrdom to rally the president's angry populist base at a time when Trump's popularity has hit a record low. Kirk's killing has drawn parallels to last summer's near miss against Trump's own life in Butler, Pennsylvania. That attack galvanized MAGA and helped tip a section of public opinion toward Trump's candidacy. Now that he's in the White House, responsible for a system in terminal decline, it's a different story. Troubles in the Trump camp. A poll conducted by YouGov and The Economist the week after Kirk was shot found that 39% of Americans approve of Trump's job performance, the lowest rating of his second term so far. This brings his net approval rating to negative 18, surpassed only by the lowest point in his first term when he scored negative 21 in 2017. Trump may have temporarily escaped the headache of a news cycle dominated by his role in the Epstein scandal, but the months-long decline in his popularity has not turned around. Among voters ages 18 to 29, he suffered a 54-point negative swing between February and July, with his youth disapproval peaking at 72%. None of his bombastic policy plans have turned the tide. After the shock and awe of deploying National Guard troops in D.C., approval for his handling of crime is at negative 7 points. After his massive campaign of ICE raids, his handling of immigration scores negative 8. As for the new, quote, golden age he promised, his rating for jobs and the economy scored negative 22. His handling of inflation, arguably the decisive factor in his electoral victory over Biden, received the lowest approval rating of any issue, negative 34. Kirk's killing galvanizes MAGA. The fracturing of the MAGA coalition was proceeding at a rapid clip before Kirk was killed. GOP voters were becoming disillusioned in Trump. Many were even open to hearing out a class struggle message from the communists. More than one comrade in the RCA today is a former Trump supporter. In the short term, this process has been cut across by an act of individual terror, which communists oppose. It has allowed Trump and the MAGA mouthpieces to pass from defense to offense, painting the quote left as a violent threat backed by dark networks of money and power, which is ironic considering that the Democrats and the Republicans are on the Epstein list. Many people who had never heard of Kirk will now give his reactionary message a sympathetic hearing. His campus organization, Turning Point USA, is reporting a surge in tens of thousands of new applicants. Many conservative youth will now cling even more fervently to the right, and their hatred of, quote, the left will be hardened. These are all reactionary consequences of Kirk's murder. Instead of advancing class consciousness, it again brought the culture war to the fore. Instead of helping to cleave the working class section of MAGA away from Trump, it has temporarily pushed a layer of them back into his corner. But this won't last forever. Attempting to unify voters around a figure like Kirk will only get them so far. YouGov found that more people have an unfavorable view of him even after his death than a favorable one. Most of Trump's working class base wants better jobs and an end to inflation, not a red scare against a phantom network of, quote, Antifa cells. The demagoguery of the culture war is no match for the crushing reality of daily life under capitalism, and the economic pressures are only intensifying. The economy, the key question. The Wall Street Journal summed up the conundrum facing Trump. Quote, the U.S. has added just 598,000 jobs so far in 2025. Outside of 2020, when the pandemic hit, that is the fewest for the first 8 months of the year since 2009, when the economy was buckled by the financial crisis. End quote. In other words, Trump 2.0 has ushered in the most anemic job growth since the Great Recession. On top of this, a string of downward revisions to the official job reports over the summer reveal that there were 1.2 million fewer jobs created than previously reported. The economy has been losing steam for months. The U6 unemployment rate suggests that nearly 14 million people are either out of work or are stuck working part-time, though they need full-time employment. And as of last month, there are fewer available jobs than there are job seekers for the first time in over 4 years. Trump's plans to, quote, bring back industry have failed spectacularly. After a loss of 87,000 manufacturing jobs last year, 33,000 more have been lost so far in 2025, along with 7,000 construction jobs and 17,000 jobs in professional and business services. Trump has brushed all this off, saying that the real jobs numbers will come next year after more technology sites open. Quote, you're gonna see the job numbers like our country has never seen before, he said. The reality is that in the coming years, workers will likely see economic devastation and decline like they've never seen before. The capitalists are the enemy class. Their rule and their system are the source of our misery, and collectively, we have the power to put an end to it. If the U.S. isn't already sliding towards recession, an economic crisis at some point during Trump's term is all but guaranteed. class anger in need of an outlet. What is the basic content of the culture war message spread by the right populists to the working class? They say, you're right to be angry. Your life has gotten hard. And the left, a meaningless term meant to include the liberals, the media, the political establishment, and even billionaires, is to blame. Meanwhile, what basic message do MAGA voters hear from the liberal establishment? Trump's base is full of ignorant, low-income voters with deplorable social views rallying behind a fascist. Oh, and the economy was doing just fine under Biden. None of that is true. What the U.S. working class is not hearing from any prominent force is consistent class politics. The task falls to communists to advance this message systematically. All of us who work for a wage have more in common with one another than we do with the tiny handful of billionaires who profit from their control of society's wealth. The capitalists are the enemy class. Their rule and their system are the source of our misery, and collectively, we have the power to put an end to it. A mass communist party would communicate this program in 1,000 ways, using every event to make it more concrete. When this class outlook takes root deeply enough among the working class, it will spell the end of the culture war and will cut the ground from under the feet of right demagogues like Trump and Kirk. But this political struggle can only be won through the battle for clear ideas, the direction of history. During the Red Scare of the post-war era, the American ruling class was united and confident in its rule. The world market was expanding, and the capitalists' growing profits allowed them to give a few material concessions to the working class. Today, there is no unity. The era of globalization is over, and the rulers are gripped with pessimism. U.S. imperialism is in rapid decline and in retreat from the world stage. Capitalism is in an era of senile decay, and this makes it an unstoppable motor force of social discontent. The anger in society will only grow, but it needs to be channeled in a revolutionary direction. The RCA is as yet a modest force with a tiny voice in the political landscape, but history is on our side. And although it will not proceed in a straight line, our message will continue to resonate more strongly in the years ahead. The ruling class is powerless to stop this process. It is up to the cadres of the Revolutionary Communist International, armed with the power of Marxist ideas, to carry on its revolutionary conclusion. Reserve your spot at a Marxist school near you. The RCA is holding Marxist school in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York City. We're living through a convulsive period in world history. Each week brings more warmongering and austerity from the ruling class. In response, we've seen explosive mass movements and even revolutionary uprisings. It's hard to keep up when events are developing at a rapid pace. Old methods for making sense of the world no longer suffice. Workers and young people are searching for answers. Even those who have mastered the basics of Marxist theory need to study new phenomena and formations closely to understand them in their totality and historical development. The role of a party is to accelerate this process, to prepare ourselves for the events ahead through collective study of lessons passed down to us by previous generations of revolutionaries. The current situation demands action, but to take down capitalism, our action must be based on a solid theoretical foundation. That's why we're holding these schools. There are no other events like this in America. A weekend of political education and discussion on the burning questions of the moment, summed up by the title of one of the main sessions, Where is America Going? Other sessions include what capitalism is and why it can't be reformed, how to win the masses, Lenin's left-wing communism, the end of the American century and the rise of China, the Spanish Revolution of 1936 to 39, myths of Stalinism, what Lenin and Trotsky really stood for, how the Bolsheviks won power, building a revolutionary organization. This fall, on college campuses across the country, we've made contact with thousands of people interested in fighting for communism. Many have already joined the RCA. Now, to continue building the party and prepare for future upheavals, we must strive to educate ourselves in the science of Marxism. If you're ready to take up this task, buy your ticket for a Marxist school near you today. Record 70% now believe the American dream was a lie. If you work hard and play by the rules, you'll get ahead. Thus, the American dream has been ingrained for generations. But in our era of capitalist decline, millions of American workers have completely lost faith in this idea. Years of struggling just to keep their heads above water have eroded confidence in this ideological pillar of American capitalism. The Wall Street Journal found the results of the recent WSJ NORC poll highly concerning. Nearly 70% of people said they believe the American dream, that if you work hard you will get ahead, no longer holds true or never did, and the highest level, which is the highest level in nearly 15 years of surveys. The share of the population who say they have a good chance of improving their standard of living has fallen to just 25%, the lowest figure since the surveys began in 1987, which is interesting because that's the year I was born. Across the board, workers feel uneasy about their financial situation. Millions have already seen their real wages stagnate or decline. Those who still have a semblance of income stability are not confident it will last. Quote, faith in the American dream is fading as economic pessimism grips the nation. The journal fretted. The profound shift in consciousness reflects the historic impasse of U.S. and world capitalism. All good things come to an end. All ideas are taken from experience, are reflections, true or distorted, of reality, wrote Friedrich Engels. Like all ideas, the quote, American dream had a historical material basis, and there was a reason it spread so widely. The American capitalist class really did have exceptionally favorable conditions to forge and refine their rule after stamping out chattel slavery and completing their genocidal campaign against the American Indians. The ruling class controlled a vast resource-rich continent ripe for capitalist expansion. Back then, they struggled to find enough labor to meet their needs, and to ordinary farmers and workers, they promised that as long as you work hard, you will succeed. For quite some time, it appeared to be true. From the homesteaders of the 19th century to the industrial workers and small businessmen after the U.S. Civil War, to those who lived through the unprecedented prosperity of the post-World War II economic upswing, it seemed that life improved for each subsequent generation. It certainly wasn't perfect. The daily horrors of capitalism remained a fact of life. Nonetheless, things seemed to be getting better in the long run. But since the economic crisis of the mid-70s, and especially since the so-called financial crisis of 2008, American capitalism has been faltering. Now U.S. imperialism is in relative decline, while China and Russia have emerged as major imperialist competitors. The American capitalist lucky streak is over. Faced with declining influence on a world scale, they're preparing for a further onslaught against the working class here at home. Something has got to give. The combination of a tight job market, rising levels of household debt, and inflation weighs workers across the country. A supermajority of the population now sees that the promise of hard work leading inevitably to a decent life simply isn't true. As Austin Odell explained to the Wall Street Journal, I was doing everything. I thought, right, and I'm still not feeling like I'm ahead. Despite earning an MBA through the GI Bill, he has been unable to find adequate employment to support his wife and daughter after losing his job last year. It's no wonder that a recent Gallup poll found that only 54% of Americans have a positive view of capitalism, the lowest since they started asking this question in 2010. Just 34% view big business favorably, down from 52% in 2019. In a country where individualism is so deeply rooted, it is inevitable that many turn first to individual solutions, but it's increasingly clear that collective problems require a collective solution. The rising support for unions, socialism, and even communism indicates where consciousness is heading. A massive upsurge in the class struggle is on the horizon, and we need to prepare for it now. White-collar work used to be cushy. That era is over. 50 years ago, as the post-war boom came to a close, American capitalists scaled back their investments on production. Factory jobs were lost by millions. The capitalists offered a solution. Young people simply needed to strive for new types of white-collar jobs in the emerging, quote, information sector. Since then, several generations of Americans have been told that as long as you earn a college degree, you can land a white-collar job and have the same kind of job security that your parents or grandparents did. Learn to code, the capitalists advised. Factory workers had once edged out farmers. Now, knowledge workers would replace factory workers, and the, quote, dynamic American economy would continue to grow and innovate, with new industries emerging and more complex jobs opening up in eternity. And I'd just like to note that I came to Tallahassee 10 years ago after I got out of the Army, and I was just hitchhiking around the country, and I ended up here. And I made friends with a few university students who were close to my age back then, and I was even roommates with this one for a while. We'd been friends for almost 10 years, and he was learning to code. He got several degrees from Florida State University, FSU, the home of the Seminoles, here in Tallahassee, and he got degrees in mathematics, he got degrees in computer science, and last year he killed himself. For several decades, those who were able to go to college did see some success, as white-collar sectors of the U.S. economy continued to grow. This served to prolong illusions in the, quote, American dream. But the limits of the process have been reached. A slowing economy, paired with the once-in-a-generation rise of artificial intelligence, has made white-collar job security more precarious than ever. The pages of the bourgeois press are filled with stories about college-educated workers who have applied to hundreds or even thousands of jobs to no avail. The trend is particularly stark in the tech sector, which until recently was considered a rock-solid route to financial stability. Hundreds of thousands of young people did learn to code, but demand for them has now plummeted. In Marx's time, the power loom replaced the hand loom in the English textile industry, leading to mass unemployment for a generation of workers. Today, capitalism is increasingly pushing college graduates into low-wage jobs or long-term unemployment. Meanwhile, workers who manage to land white-collar jobs often find them more grueling than ever as companies slash workforces and load increasing responsibilities onto those who remain. Despite doing everything right, young workers are in for a lifetime of downward mobility and declining living standards. The unemployment rate for 20 to 24-year-olds is already 7.9%, with recent college graduates facing a historically difficult job market. Young workers are enraged. Despite doing everything right, they are in for a lifetime of downward mobility and declining living standards. And here is a headline from the Wall Street Journal. Tech workers are just like the rest of us, miserable at work. The disappearing white-collar job. A once-in-a-generation convergence of technology and pressure to operate more efficiently, as corporations saying many lost jobs may never return. And a headline from the New York Times says, goodbye $165,000 tech jobs. Student coders seek work at Chipotle. As companies like Amazon and Microsoft lay off workers and embrace AI coding tools, computer science graduates say they're struggling to land tech jobs. Some recent graduates For some recent graduates, the AI job apocalypse may already be here. The unemployment rate for recent college grads has jumped as companies try to replace entry-level workers with artificial intelligence. And a headline from the Washington Post says, in the job market, Gen Z is cooked. Gen Z is staring down a rough labor market. Entry-level positions require years of experience. Companies are laying off people en masse, and AI is screening job applications. Will Gen Z be able to find work? And again, like I said, one of my friends that I've known for a decade here in Tallahassee, he was an FSU university graduate with degrees in mathematics and computer science. He had all these degrees, but he wasn't willing to take a job at Chipotle because he realized none of these other jobs were hiring in his sector that he went to school for, and he killed himself last year. And that's what's facing a lot of these young college students who go and get multiple degrees at universities. And now, according to this headline from the New York Times, they're seeking jobs at Chipotle. But they have to compete with someone like me, and I've been making food my whole life. I want to make food. I'm good at it, and I love cooking. Political violence is rising. The ruling class is to blame. After the killing of Charlie Kirk, politicians of both parties joined hands in a moral condemnation of political violence. Predictably, every major political figure posted a statement with some variant of the words, "Political violence has no place in our country." Yet it's clear for all to see that political violence has become extremely common. Since summer 2024, there have been 2 attempts on Trump's life, 2 shootings of Democratic state legislators in Minnesota, and a firebombing of the Pennsylvania governor's home. Elected officials aren't the only ones targeted. In August, a 30-year-old man opposed to vaccines opened fire at the CDC headquarters in Atlanta, killing a police officer. In July, a 27-year-old man killed 4 people, including a Blackstone executive, in a Manhattan office building. He'd intended to target National Football League executives based in the same building as a protest against football-related brain injuries. Violence against political figures was once the sort of thing that happened in unstable democracies far away, wrote Reed Epstein of the New York Times. Now it is a fact of life in America, like the school shootings that once shocked the national conscience. These are symptoms of a declining society full of people with no hope or confidence that they can effect change through, quote, normal channels. Rather than pursuing collective struggle, the decision to, quote, take matters into your own hands through political violence reflects the individualist outlook of the ruling class. The fact is, American capitalism has a long history of violence from its very beginning. However, if political violence has become part of the American fabric, the class ruling over this system is to blame. No system is more violent than capitalism, and no ruling class has more blood on its hands than the American ruling class, which has directly or indirectly killed tens of millions of people worldwide, and which is directly funding the extermination of the population of Gaza to this day. The working class is the one force in history with an interest in putting an end to political violence, and the strength to do so. But uniting this class requires that the culture war divisions be replaced with a clear class struggle program. So I will wrap up my reading for now, and we will move on to some meditation, followed by yoga and a martial arts workout. But tomorrow, when we get back to reading, we will read about American imperialism blindsided by China's rise. Sit down, buddy. You're being weird. So we're going to switch gears and listen to the Lenin Audiobooks I've been working my way through. And we're going to meditate on that while we listen for 30 minutes. So, I'm going to write out my plan for the workout tonight. Last time I did this kickboxing combination, push kick, jab cross, elbow, right kick. And then I worked on the Uchimata hip throw and the omoplata arm lock, along with the other techniques I usually practice every day. So I'm going to look up which kickboxing combinations I'm working on today. Leg kick, left hook cross. And I'm going to pick up another one just because it's a little short. Jab, jab, cross, leg kick. Okay. And as far as grappling techniques go, I think I'm on to rolling techniques today. Yep, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so I'm going to do rolling techniques. And on that note, we will begin with the daily meditation, listening to Lenin. Excuse me, buddy. Ooh, I've been working my way through this playlist, and there is a lot of them I've already listened to, and a lot more to go. So we're going to listen to Adventurism by Lenin to start with, and then going on from there.
Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the October 2022 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of Adventurism by Lenin from 1914. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So this piece was published in Robochi, number 7, June 9, 1914, signed V. Ilian, and published according to that text. The source is Lenin Collected Works, Progress Publishers, 1972, Moscow, Volume 20, translated by Bernard Isaacs and the late Joe Feinberg, HTML transcription and markup by R. Simbala, and it's in the public domain of the Lenin Internet Archive within the Marxists Internet Archive. Thanks as usual to MIAMarxists.org for hosting this and thousands of other free Marxist texts. So let's begin. When Marxists say that certain groups are adventurist, they have in mind the very definite and specific social and historical features of a phenomenon, one that every class-conscious worker should be familiar with. The history of Russian social democracy teems with tiny groups which sprang up for an hour, for several months, with no roots whatever among the masses, and politics without the masses are adventurous politics, and with no serious and stable principles. In a petty bourgeois country, which is passing through a historical period of bourgeois reconstruction, it is inevitable that a motley assortment of intellectuals should join the workers, and that these intellectuals should attempt to form all kinds of groups, adventurous in character, in the sense referred to above. So comment, again, what is that sense referred to above? Tiny groups springing up for an hour or for several months with no roots among the masses, and with no serious and stable principles. Continuing. Workers who do not wish to be fooled should subject every group to the closest scrutiny and ascertain how serious its principles are and what roots it has in the masses. Put no faith in words. Subject everything to the closest scrutiny, such as the motto of the Marxist workers. Let us recall the struggle between Iskrism and economism between 1895 and 1902. These were two trends of social democratic thought. One of them was proletarian and Marxist, which had stood the test of the 3 years campaign conducted by Iskra, and been tested by all advanced workers who recognized as their own the precisely and clearly formulated decisions on Iskra's tactics and organization. Iskra was the name of the newsletter that Lenin published. Its name means to spark. The other, economism, was a bourgeois, opportunist trend, which strove to subordinate the workers to the liberals. Besides these two important trends, there were a host of small and rootless groups, Svoboda, Borba, the group that published the Berlin leaflets, and so forth. These have long been forgotten. Footnote here, the Svoboda, or Freedom Group, was founded by Y.O. Zelensky in May 1901. It called itself the Revolutionary Socialist Group and published the journal Svoboda in Switzerland, of which 2 issues appeared, number 1 in 1901 and number 2 in 1902. The group also published The Eve of the Revolution, a review of questions of theory and tactics, number 1, a periodical, Otkliki Comments, number 1, a programmatic pamphlet, The Revival of Revolutionism in Russia, and others. The Svoboda group preached the ideas of terrorism and economism, acted in concert with the St. Petersburg economists against Iskra and the St. Petersburg Committee of the RSDLP. The group ceased to exist in 1903. The Borba, or Struggle, group was formed in Paris in the summer of 1900 and consisted of D.B. Ryazanov, Y.M. Stelkov, and E.L. Gurevich. The name Borba was adopted by the group in May 1901. In its publications, the group distorted the revolutionary theory of Marxism, which it interpreted in a doctrinaire and scholastic spirit, and was opposed to Lenin's organizational principles of party building. In view of its deviations from social democratic views and tactics, its disruptive activities, and lack of contact with the social democratic organizations in Russia, the group was not allowed to attend the Second Congress. By a decision of the Second Congress of the RSDLP, the Borba group was dissolved. Back to the text. Though there were no few honest and conscientious social democrats in these groups, they proved adventurous in the sense that they had no stable or serious principles, program, tactics, organization, and no roots among the masses. It is thus, and only thus, by studying the history of the movement, by pondering over the ideological significance of definite theories, and by putting phrases to the test of facts, that serious people should appraise present-day trends in groups. Only simpletons put faith in words. Pravdism is a trend which has given precise Marxist answers and resolutions of 1908, 1910, 1912, and 1913, in February and in the summer, on all questions of tactics, organization, and program. The continuity of these decisions since the time of the old Iskra, 1901 to 03, let alone the London Congress of 1907, has been of the strictest. The correctness of these decisions has been proved by the 5 or 6 years' experience from 1908 to 14 of all the advanced workers who have accepted these decisions as their own. Pravdism has united 4/5 of the class-conscious workers of Russia, 5,300 social democratic workers' groups out of 6,700 in 2.5 years. Liquidationism is a trend with a history that goes back almost 20 years, for it is the direct continuation of economism, 1895 to 02, and the offspring of Menshevism, 1903 to 08. The liberal bourgeois roots and the liberal bourgeois content of this trend have been recognized in official decisions, 1908 and 1910. Small wonder that the liquidators are afraid even to publish them in full. The liquidators' liberal ideas are all linked up and of a piece. Down with the underground, down with the pillars, for an open party, against the, quote, strike craze, against the higher forms of the struggle, and so forth. In liberal bourgeois society, the liquidators have long enjoyed the strong sympathy of the cadets and of the non-party and near-party intellectuals. Liquidationism is a serious trend, only not a Marxist, not a proletarian trend, but a liberal bourgeois one. Only witless people can talk about peace with the liquidators. Now take the other groups which pose as trends. We shall enumerate them. 1. The Viperiod group plus Alexinsky. 2. Ditto plus Bogdanov. 3. Ditto plus Voinov. 4. The Plekhanovites. 5. The, quote, pro-party Bolsheviks, who are actually conciliators, Mark Sommer and his crowd. 6. The Trotskyists, i.e. Trotsky even minus Semkovsky. 7. The Caucasians, i.e. On minus the Caucasus. We have enumerated the groups mentioned in the press. In Russia and abroad, they have stated that they want to be separate trends and groups. We have tried to list all the Russian groups, omitting the non-Russian. All these groups, without exception, represent sheer adventurism. But why? Where's the proof, the reader will ask. Proof is provided by the history of the last decade, 1904 to 14, which is most eventful and significant. During these 10 years, members of these groups have displayed the most helpless, most pitiful, most ludicrous vacillation on serious questions of tactics and organization, and have shown their utter inability to create trends with roots among the masses. Take Plekhanov, the best of them. The services he rendered in the past were immense. During the 20 years between 1883 and 1903, he wrote a large number of splendid essays, especially those against the opportunists, Machists, and Narodniks. But since 1903, Plekhanov has been vacillating in the most ludicrous manner on questions of tactics and organization. 1. 1903 August, a Bolshevik. 2. 1903 November, in favor of peace with the, quote, opportunist Mensheviks. 3. 1903 December, a Menshevik and an ardent one. 4. 1905 spring, after the victory of the Bolsheviks, in favor of, quote, unity between, quote, brothers at strife. 5. The end of 1905 till mid-1906, a Menshevik. 6. Mid-1906, started on and off to move away from the Mensheviks, and in London, in 1907, censured them, Cherovanin's admission, for their, quote, organizational anarchism. 7. 1908, a break with the liquidators. 8. 1914, a new turn toward the liquidators. Plekhanov advocates unity with them, without being able to utter an intelligible word to explain on what terms this unity is to be achieved, why unity with Mr. Patrusov has become possible, and what guarantees there are that any terms agreed to will be carried out. After a decade of such experience, we can safely say that Plekhanov is capable of producing ripples, but he has not produced, nor will he ever produce a, quote, trend. We quite understand the Pravdists willingly published Plekhanov's articles against the liquidators. They could not very well reject articles which, in full accord with the decisions of 1908 to 1910, were directed against the liquidators. Now, Plekhanov has begun to repeat, with the liquidators, with Bogdanov and the rest, phrases about the unity of, quote, all trends. We emphatically condemn this line, which should be relentlessly combated. Nowhere in the world do the workers' parties unite groups of intellectuals and trends. They unite workers on the following terms. 1. Recognition and application of definite Marxist decisions on questions of tactics and organization. 2. Submission of the minority of class-conscious workers to the majority. This unity, on the basis of absolute repudiation of the opponents of the, quote, underground, was achieved by the Pravdists in the course of 2.5 years. 1912 to 14, to the extent of 4/5. Witless people may abuse the Pravdists and call them factionalists, splitters, and so forth, but these phrases and abuse will not wipe out the unity of the workers. Plekhanov now threatens to destroy this unity of the majority. We calmly and firmly say to the workers, put no faith in words, put them to the test of facts, and you will see that every step taken by every one of the above-mentioned adventurist groups more and more glaringly reveals their helpless and pitiful vacillation. That's the end of the text. What do you think? Leave a question or comment below. We'll continue the discussion there as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful. I would make content even if nobody supported, but the financial support allows me to spend a lot more time on it than I would be able to do without that financial support. So again, it's a big help. If you like this channel, thank a patron and consider becoming one. Beyond that, engagement counts, and it helps YouTube to recommend this content to more people. So like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment, even if it's just thanks or good video. Again, the channel has been growing, and that's because YouTube keeps showing the content to more and more people, thanks in part to all the people who have been commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks again, and we will catch you in the next video. Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the August 2022 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of The Right of Nations to Self-Determination by Lenin from 1914. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So this work was written between February and May 1914. It was published April to June 1914 in the journal Prozveshchenia, numbers 4, 5, and 6, signed V. Ilyin, published according to the text in the journal. The source is Lenin's Collected Works, Progress Publishers, 1972, Moscow, Volume 20, translated by Bernard Isaacs and the late Joe Feinberg, HTML transcription and markup by B. Baggins, D. Walters, and K. Goins. It's in the public domain in the Lenin Internet Archive within the Marxists Internet Archive, marxists.org. Thanks as usual to MIA for hosting this file and thousands of other free Marxist texts. I want to mention also before we begin that if you're listening to this on the Socialism for All YouTube channel, you can find this work in a number of playlists, including the playlist on the USSR and Revolutionary Russia, the Lenin playlist of all works by Lenin, the playlist of all works by all authors, and the American Party of Labor's recommended reading list. You can find all of those playlists either on the Home tab or on the Playlists tab at the Socialism for All YouTube channel. So let's get into the work. Clause 9 of the Russian Marxists' program, which deals with the right of nations to self-determination, has, as we have already pointed out in Prozveshchenia, given rise lately to a crusade on the part of the opportunists. The Russian liquidator Semkovsky in the St. Petersburg liquidationist newspaper, and the Bundist Liebman, and the Ukrainian National Socialist Yurkovich in their respective periodicals have violently attacked this clause and treated it with supreme contempt. There is no doubt that this campaign of a motley array of opportunists against our Marxist program is closely connected with present-day nationalist vacillations in general. Hence, we consider a detailed examination of this question timely. We would mention in passing that none of the opportunists named above has offered a single argument of their own. They all merely repeat what Rosa Luxemburg said in her lengthy Polish article of 1908-09, The National Question and Autonomy. In our exposition, we shall deal mainly with the, quote, original arguments of this last-named author. 1. What is meant by the self-determination of nations? Naturally, this is the first question that arises when any attempt is made at a Marxist examination of what is known as self-determination. What should be understood by that term? Should the answer be sought in legal definitions deduced from all sorts of, quote, general concepts of law? Or is it rather to be sought in a historical economic study of the national movements? It's not surprising that the Semkovskys, Liebmans, and Yurkoviches did not even think of raising this question and shrugged it off by scoffing at the, quote, obscurity of the Marxist program. apparently unaware, in their simplicity, that the self-determination of nations is dealt with not only in the Russian program of 1903, but in the resolution of the London International Congress of 1896, which I shall deal in detail in the proper place. Far more surprising is the fact that Rosa Luxemburg, who declaims a great deal about the supposedly abstract and metaphysical nature of the clause in question, should herself succumb to the sin of abstraction and metaphysics. It is Rosa Luxemburg herself who is continually lapsing into generalities about self-determination, to the extent even of philosophizing amusingly on the question of how the will of the nation is to be ascertained, without anywhere clearly and precisely asking herself whether the gist of the matter lies in legal definitions or in the experience of the national movements throughout the world. A precise formulation of this question, which no Marxist can avoid, would at once destroy 9/10 of Rosa Luxemburg's arguments. This is not the first time that national movements have arisen in Russia, nor are they peculiar to that country alone. Throughout the world, the period of the final victory of capitalism over feudalism has been linked up with national movements. For the complete victory of commodity production, the bourgeoisie must capture the home market, and there must be politically united territories whose populations speak a single language, with all obstacles to the development of that language and to its consolidation in literature eliminated. Therein is the economic foundation of national movements. Language is the most important means of human intercourse. Unity and unimpeded development of language are the most important conditions for genuinely free and extensive commerce on a scale commensurate with modern capitalism, for a free and broad grouping of the population in all its various classes, and, lastly, for the establishment of a close connection between the market and each and every proprietor, big or little, and between seller and buyer. Therefore, the tendency of every national movement is toward the formation of national states, under which these requirements of modern capitalism are best satisfied. The most profound economic factors drive toward this goal, and therefore for the whole of Western Europe, nay, for the entire civilized world, the national state is typical and normal for the capitalist period. Consequently, if we want to grasp the meaning of self-determination of nations, not by juggling with legal definitions or, quote, inventing abstract definitions, but by examining the historico-economic conditions of the national movements, we must inevitably reach the conclusion that the self-determination of nations means the political separation of these nations from alien national bodies, and the formation of an independent national state. Later on, we shall see still other reasons why it would be wrong to interpret the right to self-determination as meaning anything but the right to existence as a separate state. At present, we must deal with Rosa Luxemburg's efforts to, quote, dismiss the inescapable conclusion that profound economic factors underlie the urge towards a national state. Rosa Luxemburg is quite familiar with Kautsky's pamphlet, Nationality and Internationality, supplement to Die Neue Zeit, number 11, 1907-08. She is aware that after carefully analyzing the question of the national state in section 4 of that pamphlet, Kautsky arrived at the conclusion that Otto Bauer, quote, underestimates the strength of the urge towards the national state. Rosa Luxemburg herself quotes the following words of Kautsky's, quote, the national state is the form most suited to present-day conditions, i.e. capitalist, civilized, economically progressive conditions, as distinguished from medieval, pre-capitalist, etc. It is the form in which the state can best fulfill its tasks, unquote, i.e. the tasks of securing the freest, widest, and speediest development of capitalism. To this, we must add Kautsky's still more precise concluding remark that states of mixed national composition, known as multinational states, as distinct from national states, are, quote, always those whose internal constitution has for some reason or other remained abnormal or underdeveloped, unquote, i.e. backward. Needless to say, Kautsky speaks of abnormality exclusively in the sense of lack of conformity with what is best adapted to the requirements of a developing capitalism. The question now is, how did Rosa Luxemburg treat these historico-economic conclusions of Kautsky's? Are they right or wrong? Is Kautsky right in his historico-economic theory, or is Bauer, whose theory is basically psychological? What is the connection between Bauer's undoubted national opportunism, his defense of cultural national autonomy, his nationalistic infatuation, quote, an occasional emphasis on the national aspect, as Kautsky put it, his, quote, enormous exaggeration of the national aspect, in complete neglect of the international aspect, quoting Kautsky, and his underestimation of the strength of the urge to create a national state. Rosa Luxemburg has not even raised this question. She has not noticed the connection. She has not considered the sum total of Bauer's theoretical views. She has not even drawn a line between the historico-economic and the psychological theories of the national question. She confines herself to the following remarks in criticism of Kautsky, quote, "This, quote, best national state is only an abstraction, which can easily be developed and defended theoretically, but which does not correspond to reality," unquote. And in corroboration of this emphatic statement, there follow arguments to the effect that the, quote, "right to self-determination of small nations is made illusory by the development of the great capitalist powers and by imperialism." Quote, "Can one seriously speak," Rosa Luxemburg exclaims, "about the self-determination of the formerly independent Montenegrins, Bulgarians, Romanians, Serbs, Greeks, partly even the Swiss, whose independence is itself a result of the political struggle and the diplomatic game of the concert of Europe," unquote. The state that best suits these conditions is, quote, "not a national state, as Kautsky believes, but a predatory one." Some dozens of figures are quoted relating to the size of British, French, and other colonial possessions. After reading such arguments, one cannot help marveling at the author's ability to misunderstand the how and the why of things. To teach Kautsky with a serious mien that small states are economically dependent on big ones, that a struggle is raging among the bourgeois states for the predatory suppression of other nations, and that imperialism in colonies exist, all this is a ridiculous and puerile attempt to be clever, for none of this has the slightest bearing on the subject. Not only small states, but even Russia, for example, is entirely dependent economically on the power of the imperialist finance capital of the, quote, rich bourgeois countries. Not only the miniature Balkan states, but even 19th century America was, economically, a colony of Europe, as Marx pointed out in Capital. Kautsky, like any Marxist, is of course well aware of this, but that has nothing whatever to do with the question of national movements and the national state. For the question of the political self-determination of nations and their independence as states in bourgeois society, Rosa Luxemburg has substituted the question of their economic independence. This is just as intelligent as if someone, in discussing the programmatic demand for the supremacy of parliament, i.e. the assembly of people's representatives in a bourgeois state, were to expound the perfectly correct conviction that big capital dominates in a bourgeois country, whatever the regime in it. There is no doubt that the greater part of Asia, the most densely populated continent, consists either of colonies of the, quote, great powers, or of states that are extremely dependent and oppressed as nations. But does this commonly known circumstance in any way shake the undoubted fact that in Asia itself, the conditions for the most complete development of commodity production and the freest, widest, and speediest growth of capitalism have been created only in Japan, i.e. only in an independent national state? The latter is a bourgeois state, and for that reason has itself begun to oppress other nations and to enslave colonies. We cannot say whether Asia will have had time to develop into a system of independent national states like Europe before the collapse of capitalism, but it remains an undisputed fact that capitalism, having awakened Asia, has called forth national movements everywhere in that continent too, that the tendency of these movements is toward the creation of national states in Asia, that it is such states that ensure the best conditions for the development of capitalism. The example of Asia speaks in favor of Kautsky and against Rosa Luxemburg. The example of the Balkan states likewise contradicts her, for anyone can now see that the best conditions for the development of capitalism in the Balkans are created precisely in proportion to the creation of independent national states in that peninsula. Therefore, Rosa Luxemburg notwithstanding, the example of the whole of progressive and civilized mankind, the example of the Balkans and that of Asia, prove that Kautsky's proposition is absolutely correct. The national state is the rule and the norm of capitalism. The multinational state represents backwardness or is an exception. From the standpoint of national relations, the best conditions for the development of capitalism are undoubtedly provided by the national state. This does not mean, of course, that such a state, which is based on bourgeois relations, can eliminate the exploitation and oppression of nations. It only means that Marxists cannot lose sight of the powerful economic factors that give rise to the urge to create national states. It means that self-determination of nations in the Marxist program cannot, from a historico-economic point of view, have any other meaning than political self-determination, state independence, and the formation of a national state. The conditions under which the bourgeois democratic demand for a national state should be supported from a Marxist, i.e. class proletarian point of view, will be dealt with in detail below. For the present, we shall confine ourselves to the definition of the concept of self-determination, and only note that Rosa Luxemburg knows what this concept means, national state, whereas her opportunist partisans, the Liebmans, the Semkovskys, the Yurkoviches, do not even know that. That's the end of section 1. I just want to note here, if you haven't already read or listened to Stalin's Marxism and the National Question, which just went up here at the channel recently this week, definitely read that for more background on, this subject generally, but also specifically the views of Bauer and others. Section 2, the historically concrete presentation of the question. The categorical requirement of Marxist theory in investigating any social question is that it be examined within definite historical limits, and if it refers to a particular country, e.g. the national program for a given country, that account be taken of the specific features distinguishing that country from others in the same historical epoch. Quick comment. So this is really key in Marxist analysis. You can't just apply set formulas to all different situations throughout space and time. You have to take in the specific features distinguishing a country or situation from others that may be occurring in the same historical epoch. Not everywhere has the same conditions, the same state of development, etc. So rereading that, the categorical requirement of Marxist theory in investigating any social question is that it be examined within definite historical limits, and that particular countries should be differentiated from any others even in the same time period. This is really key. It's not to say that there won't be similarities between different, cases, different situations. It does mean that you have to be specific about the conditions that you're working in. For example, trying to do chemistry at -20 degrees Celsius versus trying to do chemistry at 200 degrees Celsius. You may have to account for the temperature change. It's going to affect pressure and all kinds of other things. Anyway, continuing. What does this categorical requirement of Marxism imply in its application to the question under discussion? First of all, it implies that a clear distinction must be drawn between the two periods of capitalism, which differ radically from each other as far as the national movement is concerned. Comment. Pay attention during this part. What are the two periods of capitalism, and why does Lenin say that they differ radically from each other as far as the national movement is concerned? Here we go. On the one hand, there is the period of the collapse of feudalism and absolutism, the period of the formation of the bourgeois democratic society and state, when the national movements for the first time become mass movements, and in one way or another draw all classes of the population into politics, through the press, participation in representative institutions, etc. On the other hand, there is the period of fully formed capitalist states, with a long-established constitutional regime and a highly developed antagonism between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, a period that may be called the eve of capitalism's downfall. So commenting, that is the later developed form, as distinct from the earlier developing stage of capitalism and the bourgeois national project. Continuing. The typical features of the first period are the awakening of national movements and the drawing of the peasants, the most numerous and most sluggish section of the population, into these movements, in connection with the struggle for political liberty in general and for the rights of the nation in particular. Typical features of the second period are the absence of mass bourgeois democratic movements and the fact that developed capitalism, in bringing closer together nations that have already been fully drawn into commercial intercourse and causing them to intermingle to an increasing degree, brings the antagonism between international united capital and the international working class movement into the forefront. Of course, the two periods are not walled off from each other. They're connected by numerous transitional links, the various countries differing from each other in the rapidity of their national development, in the national makeup and the distribution of their population, and so on. There can be no question of the Marxists of any country drawing up their national program without taking into account all these general historical and concrete state conditions. It is here that we come up against the weakest point in Rosa Luxemburg's arguments. With extraordinary zeal, she embellishes her article with a collection of hard words directed against Section 9 of our program, which she declares to be, quote, sweeping, a platitude, a metaphysical phrase, and so on without end. It would be natural to expect an author who so admirably condemns metaphysics, in the Marxist sense, i.e. anti-dialectics, and empty abstractions, to set us an example of how to make a concrete historical analysis of the question. The question at issue is the national program of the Marxists of a definite country, Russia, in a definite period, the beginning of the 20th century. But does Rosa Luxemburg raise the question as to what historical period Russia is passing through? Or what are the concrete features of the national question and the national movements of that particular country in that particular period? No, she does not. She says absolutely nothing about it. In her work, you will not even find the shadow of an analysis of how the national question stands in Russia in the present historical period, or of the specific features of Russia in this particular respect. We are told that the national question in the Balkans is presented differently from that in Ireland, that Marx appraised the Polish and Czech national movements in the concrete conditions of 1848 in such and such a way, a page of excerpts from Marx, that Engels appraised the struggle of the forest cantons of Switzerland against Austria and the Battle of Morgarten, which took place in 1315 in such and such a way, a page of quotations from Engels with the appropriate comments from Kautsky, that Lassalle regarded the peasant war in Germany of the 16th century as reactionary, etc. It cannot be said that these remarks and quotations have any novelty about them, but at all events it is interesting for the reader to be occasionally reminded just how Marx, Engels, and Lassalle approached the analysis of concrete historical problems in individual countries. And a perusal of these instructive quotations from Marx and Engels reveals most strikingly the ridiculous position Rosa Luxemburg has placed herself in. She preaches eloquently and angrily the need for a concrete historical analysis of the national question in different countries at different times, but she does not make the least attempt to determine what historical stage in the development of capitalism Russia is passing through at the beginning of the 20th century, or what the specific features of the national question in the country are. Rosa Luxemburg gives examples of how others have treated the question in a Marxist fashion, as if deliberately stressing how often the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and how often good counsel covers up unwillingness or inability to follow such advice in practice. Here is one of her edifying comparisons. In protesting against the demand for the independence of Poland, Rosa Luxemburg refers to a pamphlet she wrote in 1898, proving the rapid industrial development of Poland, with the latter's manufactured goods being marketed in Russia. Needless to say, no conclusion whatever can be drawn from this on the question of the right to self-determination. It only proves the disappearance of the old Poland of the landed gentry, etc. But Rosa Luxemburg always passes on imperceptibly to the conclusion that among the factors that unite Russia and Poland, the purely economic factors of modern capitalist relations now predominate. Then our Rosa proceeds to the question of autonomy, and though her article is entitled The National Question and Autonomy, in general, she begins to argue that the Kingdom of Poland has an exclusive right to autonomy. To support Poland's right to autonomy, Rosa Luxemburg evidently judges the state system of Russia by her economic, political, and sociological characteristics and everyday life, a totality of features which, taken together, produce the concept of Asiatic despotism. It is generally known that this kind of state system possesses great stability whenever completely patriarchal and pre-capitalist features predominate in the economic system, and where commodity production and class differentiation are scarcely developed. However, if in a country whose state system is distinctly pre-capitalist in character, there exists a nationally demarcated region where capitalism is rapidly developing, then the more rapidly that capitalism develops, the greater will be the antagonism between it and the pre-capitalist state system, and the more likely will be the separation of the progressive region from the whole, with which it is connected not by modern capitalistic, but by Asiatically despotic ties. Thus, Rosa Luxemburg does not get her arguments to hang together even on the question of the social structure of the government in Russia with regard to bourgeois Poland. As for the concrete, historical, specific features of the national movements in Russia, she does not even raise that question. That is the point we must now deal with. Section 3. The concrete features of the national question in Russia and Russia's bourgeois democratic reformation. Quote, despite the elasticity of the principle of the right of nations to self-determination, which is a mere platitude, and obviously equally applicable not only to the nations inhabiting Russia, but also to the nations inhabiting Germany and Austria, Switzerland and Sweden, America and Australia, we do not find it in the programs of any of the present-day socialist parties, unquote. This is how Rosa Luxemburg opens her attack upon Section 9 of the Marxist program, in trying to foist on us the conception that this clause in the program is a, quote, mere platitude. Rosa Luxemburg herself falls victim to this error, alleging with amusing boldness that this point is, quote, obviously equally applicable to Russia, Germany, etc. Obviously, we shall reply, Rosa Luxemburg has decided to make her article a collection of errors in logic that could be used for schoolboy exercises. For Rosa Luxemburg's tirade is sheer nonsense, and a mockery of the historically concrete presentation of the question. If one interprets the Marxist program in Marxist fashion, not in a childish way, one will without difficulty grasp the fact that it refers to bourgeois democratic national movements. That being the case, it is, quote, obvious that this program, sweepingly and as a, quote, mere platitude, etc., covers all instances of bourgeois democratic national movements. No less obvious to Rosa Luxemburg, if she gave the slightest thought to it, is the conclusion that our program refers only to cases where such a movement is actually in existence. Had she given thought to these obvious considerations, Rosa Luxemburg would have easily perceived what nonsense she was talking. In accusing us of uttering a platitude, she has used against us the argument that no mention is made of the right to self-determination in the programs of countries where there are no bourgeois democratic national movements. A remarkably clever argument. A comparison of the political and economic developments of various countries, as well as of their Marxist programs, is of tremendous importance from the standpoint of Marxism, for there can be no doubt that all modern states are of a common capitalist nature, and are therefore subject to a common law of development. But such a comparison must be drawn in a sensible way. The elementary condition for comparison is to find out whether the historical periods of development of the countries concerned are at all comparable. For instance, only absolute ignoramuses